My name's Louis, and
I'm Maria.
And we are from Assemble, and we are a design and architecture collective from London. And we kind of started, the way we started was really as a result of our first project, which was just a group of people coming together to build a cinema in a petrol station in central London. Yeah, at that point there was no idea of setting up an architecture office, or even, we didn't have the name Assemble, it was just a loose bunch of people.
So we were approached by actually a friend of a friend who was working with a philanthropist on a number of projects, and they wanted to work in Liverpool because of the issues that have happened, you know, with the Pathfinder scheme and the kind of dereliction of houses. But they initially wanted us to do a festival type thing, or a temporary project, and then, you know, we got introduced to the area, we got introduced to the community through those people, and then we made a kind of independent relationship with them, with the Community Land Trust, and then that's how it evolved into something else, which is working with the Community Land Trust to realise their dreams of taking over these houses, and then it kind of expanded into a bigger brief of bringing back industry, commerce and bringing life back to the area.
It might be worth just as a bit of background. So the project's in Liverpool, which is a city in the north of England, which it was originally, in the sort of Victorian times, it was quite wealthy because it was a port city, and so a lot of the housing stock are these kind of Victorian terraced housing, which is very common in the UK, sort of factory worker housing. And the area where we were working is called Toxteth, and it was a Victorian terraced housing estate. But after the kind of decline of the wealth of the Industrial Revolution, Liverpool kind of faded a little bit, and this area during the 1960s, it was kind of very vibrant area, black community. It's actually one of the oldest black communities in the UK, and over the years there was quite a lot of tension between the residents and the authorities, especially the police, which culminated in riots in the 80s where some houses were burned down and things like that. And after that, the area was seen as like a problem area, which something needed to be done. And, you know, so there was basically this policy which was called managed decline, where they wanted to sort of slowly destroy the area so that they could rebuild it, essentially. And so they stopped, you know, having public services like rubbish collection, like the police wouldn't go into the area because they said it's too dangerous and things like that. And then the council started to evict people, and this happened, and it happened very, very slowly though, and some of the terraces were eventually redeveloped, so they would demolish them and they built low density suburban housing. But it really kind of ripped the heart out of the area, because previously there'd been a high street down the middle, and they built all these cul-de-sacs, kind of dead-end street, winding dead-end streets, which meant that the high street was no longer a thoroughfare. So all the shops which had benefited from passing traffic, they no longer had that. So then the high street had difficulty as well. And when we got there in 2013, there were still a number of residents, but most of the houses were empty and in various states of dereliction. So yeah, some of them were kind of okay-ish, but some of them, like the council had taken the roof off some of the houses to stop people squatting in them. So some of them had grass growing in the bottom and things like that. And so that was the context, and the residents that remained, they formed this community land trust because they felt like the council and their policy of managed decline, wasn't working for them, for the local people. And when we got involved, it was to sort of develop this alternative master plan that involved keeping the terraces, which people love, and it's much less wasteful as well, rather than demolishing them, which had been the sort of mantra beforehand.
It's a still ongoing project, so we've completed 10 houses. There are still some more on site. And the Community Land Trust are, I guess, still active, and they want to carry on developing the area. So currently they're looking at a number of empty shop units, which they'd like to develop into community businesses and more housing. So we're kind of looking at that with them at the moment. And more people have moved into the area, a mix of people who are from Liverpool and some people who aren't. It's still interesting because even though it got all this attention, when we get a taxi from the station to go there, some of the cab drivers are still kind of like, oh, why do you want to go there? It's still by some people seen as like a dangerous or kind of weird area that you have no interest in going to. And a lot of the streets nearby are still empty or derelict. There's like one street in Topsted which is completely painted black because it's being used for a TV show, like as a stage set. But it's just a weird reality for you living there to have this black painted empty houses. It's quite depressing.
I suppose it's also worth saying, in terms of how did we engage the community, I suppose we didn't engage the community there so much as the community engaged us to help them to deliver something on their patch. So the Community Land Trust is an organisation made up of the residents that live there, and then we help them with some architecture. And of course, we spoke to lots of local people in the meantime, but it was very much facilitated by them, and that was a really important part of it.
The value of the land is much lower than somewhere like London or parts of London in that area, I guess because of the years of managed decline, and a lot of people have been moved out of the area. There's a lot of empty properties, so there isn't that much competition there. A lot of the terrace houses were being sold for £1. So the question is more about, I guess, making them attractive again and bringing people back to the area. It's not yet expensive. And so the Community Land Trust have taken ownership of some of these units in order to then provide housing back to the community, to people who are part of the Community Land Trust.
I think the council was looking for they wanted somebody to redevelop the area, but that never happened, and the land is seen as worthless, really. The way that it worked in terms of the finances was that it was funded by a philanthropic investor. So he got the money in the first place, and because that money was in place, the council then transferred the land to the Community Land Trust for free. So that's how it worked. And then, in terms of the tenants and the new owners of the housing, basically the rent and the sales price of the housing is linked to local wages. So even if you buy one of these houses, you'll buy it at an affordable rate, but when you come to resell it, you have to sell it. You can only sell it at the price that is linked to the local wages. So you can't just buy it affordably from the CLT and then sell it, for the market price the next day. And the CLT is set up. I don't know if I don't think it's officially a charity, but it's set up, for the purpose of providing affordable housing to the community. And the other aspect of it is that once we did the master plan, other local housing associations started to refurbish the terraces as well. So not related to the CLT at all. They just did their own projects, which has also been really good for the area.
Well, yeah, I guess it's hard to speak for all of the world, but yeah, our experience in like cities like London, big metropolises that are becoming more and more popular for people to live in, whereas maybe sometimes like the 60s, a lot of people moved out of the cities now, moving into cities, and so properties are rising in value, and certainly places like London, it's, people of our generation can't afford to buy a house unless they're helped by their family or they have a really high-paying job. Whereas I guess our parents had more of an opportunity to do that. So there's a lot of instability, and rent is obviously, it's not controlled, so it's not like a rent control system where, rent is like a huge proportion of people's salaries in somewhere like London, and it rises with kind of the rise of popularity of that neighbourhood. So it's quite unpredictable. Whereas, there are other cities, like, for example, Grimsby in England, that are shrinking cities, that have had an industry that stopped and that they became a lot less attractive, a lot of people moved out, or they kind of, when properties are super cheap compared to somewhere like London, but then people aren't there isn't a desire to move there. So yeah, there's kind of two extremes.
Yeah, I think, ultimately it's a very political issue, and yeah, housing is a need of the people, it's a requirement. It's like, you can't expect people to just live outside, people need shelter, and it's obvious, and like, that is, and I think around the world, politically, governments need to think about that, and the fact that you've got people, for instance, earning loads of money because they've inherited multiple properties or something, that needs to be taxed vigorously, and the money needs to be put in, it needs to be redistributed. I mean, I think it's obvious, that's how you deal with it. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, and there is a lot of development in places like London, which is speculative, which is just a financial game. And I'm not saying like development is, I feel like can be really good, but it's just so stupid to have built all these flats that no one is living in, whilst loads of people are looking for homes. It's just crazy, isn't it? And yeah, there just needs to be some control from above. Whilst it's also, we were talking about it earlier, is you have that, but on the other hand, it's really difficult to have smaller scale developments. Like if we want to build some housing, it's really difficult unless you have loads of money. So, whereas I know that there's, I don't know enough, but I know there's examples of places like Germany where there is a bit more help for small scale builders to make housing. Where I guess the planning authorities like map out the smaller plots and give them out for less money. So there could be more initiatives like that to encourage smaller builders.
It's curious because the Liverpool thing has obviously been a really great project, but yeah, it is a very different place to what you're seeing in a lot of global cities like London or Istanbul or whatever, where there's a lot of pressure on the land. It's a different thing. It's this kind of it's a place where the land was free and people didn't want the buildings, which is a very different story to a lot of places. But certainly the idea of community land ownership is something that's, we think is really good. But it just needs to be done on a bigger scale. It's happening a bit in London. It is happening a bit. So.
Yeah, no, yeah. That, and also it's good to take away attention from somewhere like London, because obviously it just makes you realise there's loads of other places that have, cheaper, like more opportunities to develop. And it's just an interesting question, like how do you balance out? So, especially like in the UK, it feels like this, London, Manchester, I don't know, like so concentrated, and everything else is so different. And whatever, people talk a lot about Brexit and realising the kind of gap between cities and different places in the UK is so huge. So it's just good to think about it,